Developing an analytical voice is a three-step process, and I want you to think about it as an intuitive process. All right, it's really just thinking about the way you think, and so it isn't nearly as difficult as it would appear. I'm just going to go through the definitions of these terms with you very quickly before we begin the lesson. So, step one is identify the evidence you're going to be using with the media in front of you, and that media can be poetry, video, advertisements, whatever it is that you're analyzing. You're going to begin with the evidence. So, with the evidence, you're going to look particularly at diction, imagery, and detail. All right, going through the process, we are going to be defining these right now. Okay, so diction means the word choice that an author chooses to include. All right, so here's an example. This is from Gone with the Wind. All right, at the very end of the story, Rhett Butler, who is the main male lead, he says to Scarlett O'Hara, who's the main female lead, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Okay, now Rhett has been in love with Scarlett the entire book, but at the very end of the book, this is the last thing that he says to her. I don't give a damn. And he walks out the door. Right now, I am looking particularly at his word choice at this particular time. The author decided to include this. Why? Why not use I don't care? Okay, why not, frankly, my dear, I don't want to talk about it right now. Okay, none of those has the kind of tone that the author wanted to imply. When I'm looking at this, I have a particular association with this cursing word. I don't give a damn is a curse. It implies extreme anger, okay, wrath, um, resentment. All of these things are implied, which would not necessarily be implied if I had just said, or if she had just said, frankly, my dear, I don't care. All right, so these are very important nuances. We need to pay attention to the differences. When you're analyzing anything, analyze what's there, but also think about what is not there. Okay, because what is not there is just as important as what is there. So it'll tell you, um, what your intended response is supposed to be. Now, talking about the detail. A detail is a small element of description considered individually. Okay, so if you look at this example from this boy's life, it's describing one of the characters, and she says she was big and loud. Notice that's diction. Okay, and here is a detail. Her arms were as thick as a man's. Now, when you think about this, okay, I'm looking at this and I notice she says they're thick like a man's. All right, why did she choose this? It's because she wants us to associate her with being strong and manly. All right, so detail is also important. It's just as important as diction. And it's usually something that we notice, in literature. It will be in the written word like this. Sometimes in visual images, it will be in minor things like font changes or um, in punctuation, that sort of thing. Okay, imagery is a mental picture. So those mental pictures that can conjure up things in our imagination are important as well. So if we look at that exact same quotation, we will analyze it. Marion was big and loud, that's diction. Her arms were thick as a man's, that's detail. And when she pounded out hamburger patties, the whole kitchen shook. Do you hear how that is an image that it puts a mental image in my mind? Okay, I can imagine what that kitchen shaking feels like, and I'm sure you all have been in a room when somebody walked in or was doing something and it shook the entire room. Okay, what does that tell you? Okay, it is an image of dominance. It's an image of power. Okay, she is an impactful woman and so forth. And so imagery is very powerful. And imagery is the kind of thing that we're going to focus on these ads that we're going to be studying early on. But it is also very possible to study it in the literature that we're using. So once you've figured out the evidence and you've identified the places that need to be analyzed, then you write down your association. An association is just whatever the psychological connection is or the feeling that you have with any of the evidence. So I want you to consider, shaking the room reminds us of power. Okay, people don't usually shake rooms. It's a very powerful image. Um, there are also images that strike fear into us. Okay, for instance, if I see the skull, the skull with the X's over it on a bottle. Okay, what is that going to remind me of? I'm going to be afraid of that because it will bring me death. Okay, if I see water, then I can have positive imagery with that, positive associations or negative associations. All right, so with water, I can have images of birth. Okay, think about it. When your mama was pregnant with you, okay, you were inside and you were doing what? You were floating around in water and you were born in water. Okay, so we've got that image of birth. Water can be an image of birth. Okay, that's a positive image. Water can also be a negative image. All right, you think about the boat. All right, that's out there on the unfortunate day when the water rises and big storm comes and destroys the boat. All right, so there's a very negative image of water. It's okay for images or some of the concepts that we look at to have duplicative meanings. So it's all right if you have this dichotomy where you have a positive image and a negative image, positive associations, negative associations with those images that you have. Now, some of them just have very straightforward, clear-cut uh, associations, like the color blue, right? When you look at the color blue, it's very positive, all right? Usually it's very positive. Um, we have that feeling of, religious feeling. It's secure. Um, it can be a feeling of love, all right? Red colors are usually very violent. What do we associate red with? With blood and violence and disorder. All right, that sort of thing. So you need to think about it in terms of like what the image is and what the association is that goes with it. There is an automatic response to everything. And this can be true of all archetypes as well. So if you look at something like a tree, you guys remember drawing trees when you were young, right? Okay, so you have a tree. What does a tree represent? A tree, okay, if I'm just thinking off the cuff, I'm thinking that a tree represents life, okay? It can represent safety. Um, I'm thinking about, a sun. What does a sun represent? Okay, it can represent the creational force because it provides us with life, and it can also represent a destructive force because it is made of fire and it can destroy us. Okay, so associations are whatever those feelings are that you have with the images or evidence that you perceive. Now, what you're going to be doing is writing the associations down next to your pieces of evidence. Now, step 3 is this. You need to figure out what is the relationship of each piece of evidence to the rest of the text. Okay, so once you have written down your associations, you think about how is this piece of evidence in contrast to or in repetition to, um, how is it relating to the other things that I have seen? All right, if for instance I have 3 images of death and 1 image of life, I am going to assume that the message is mostly a negative message and that it's a warning about death or something like that. okay, and so forth. So it helps us, looking at the relationships helps us with the last part, and I kind of consider this part of the same step. It's making a claim about the piece that we are analyzing, whether it be the poem or the movie or whatever it is. Okay, so we'll go through this step by step. Now, again, as I was talking about repetition, it's an act of doing something again. So you can see, and I'll show you some examples today of repetition. Okay, so saying or writing something again or seeing an image again and again. All right. And usually we repeat things for emphasis. So when you're thinking about what claim you're going to make about the piece, you need to consider repetition means that the author is trying to emphasize or reveal a particular fact through this repetition. Okay, so you would say something in a sentence like, Wolf repeats these images to emphasize the fact that blah, blah, blah. Okay. Um, you would finish it off with like Marion is a strong, forceful character. So you fill in whatever comes after that with the associative language that you have used. Contrast is just the difference between these things. Okay, so when you see that maybe there's been a lot of repetition of one type of evidence, but then there's a contrast. Okay, there's something that doesn't belong. It doesn't fit in with everything else. You need to figure out what that means too. All right, so here's an example using The Great Gatsby. Tom and Wilson contrast one another in confidence, wealth, and spirit. Okay, so you would figure out what it is, when you notice that there is a difference, write it down because a contrast means something and it can help you come up with that claim. Okay, now there's this funny word called juxtaposition. It's placing two or more things next to one another. Okay, it emphasizes a contrast between them. Now, one of my favorite movies is The Godfather, and I don't know if you've ever seen it. If you've never seen it, you should go home and see it. Okay, so in this movie, there's one of the guys, he's Clemenza, all right, and he tells Pally, well, he basically is asked to whack Paligato, and so he does it. Okay, he takes out his gun, he shoots him. He says, "Leave the gun," and then he adds, "Take the cannoli." All right, why does he do that? Leave the gun. He just shot him. All right, but he says, "Take the cannoli." If you don't know what that is, it's like a little sweet treat that Italians make, and it is so tasty. It's like a little rolled crust, and then it has a cream filling, lots of chocolate chips, and it's yummy. Okay, and his wife asked Clemenza to pick up some cannoli on the way home. So this reveals juxtaposition because he just finished a brutal murder, and then he asks the guy, "Take the cannoli." Okay, and that cannoli is indicative of his family life, his good husband duty. Okay, so it reveals the juxtaposition of that character. When he says, "Leave the gun," that makes him look like a cruel killer, and "Take the cannoli," it underscores the dual nature of Clemenza. All right, he's a family man and a ruthless killer. So that's what juxtaposition is. It's when you place two or more unlike things next to each other to emphasize a contrast. And just one more point. Juxtaposition, it might be easier to think of like this, and I think you guys might be familiar with that Taylor Swift song. Um, when she says, "She wears short skirts, I wear t-shirts," things like that. That's juxtaposition also. Um, she's cheer captain and I'm in the bleachers. Those two images placed side by side show how different they are. Okay, so that's juxtaposition. Now, shift. Okay, you got to also pay attention to shifts, which is change of position, direction, makeup, any kind of shift in tone or attitude. And this is really clear when we see it in literature, but in ads or visual things, it'll be clear by shifts in maybe color or in the attitude or expressions of people's faces, that sort of thing. Okay, so the author's attitude or tone shifts from blank to blank, and there you fill in with associative language from, and this is just, from happy to sad, or from jubilant to morose, because blah, blah, blah. And it helps you to explain reasoning. So those are the words defined for the voice chart. Now we're going to go on to the examples of ads and use the chart to analyze.